So we meet a family. There is Richard Stokes, who we didn't really meet per se until later on in the movie, because at the beginning of the movie, he got killed. And so we see where the wife is getting the phone call to notify her of what had happened. And this happened to be on their daughter's birthday. Their daughter is India. And so the wife is Evie, and then the husband is Richard Stokes. So we see where she's preparing for her birthday, and then she gets the phone call. Shortly after that scene, we see where they are doing the funeral. We see them sitting there doing the service. And as they're sitting there for the funeral, India notices a guy further in the distance. It looks to be at a cemetery, so they're at the burial part, but then there are buildings like church buildings, so the guy is further away. Later on, when they're having the reception at the house, she sees this guy, and so she recognized him from the funeral as the guy who was just standing there being creepy. So we find out that this guy is Charlie, who is her dad's brother, whom she has never met. But she's walking around the room, and she's watching him, and I guess he's doing the same. And so while she was going out along the hallway, we see where he's walking behind her. And so she went out the door, and I think this was a point where her mom, Evie, accosted him and pulled him in a different direction. So she ended up coming back around to the front door, and she's going up the stairs. And what do you know? Here's the creepy guy at the top of the stairs. And so he was like, oh, well, I think your mom's going to have me stay here, and I want to make sure that you're okay with it, which he didn't ask if she was okay with it. But, he was just creepy from the beginning. Something just wasn't right with him. But anyway, he's going to be staying there with them, but we get a vibe of inappropriateness between him and Evie, who is his brother's wife. She's being a bit flirty with him. And I don't know what his plans were, but he seemed to just be moving in right after his brother died. So the next day after the funeral, they're going into town. We see where he's in the sports car, which belongs to his brother. He's got the top going down, and then Evie comes in the car. And so they're going to go into town. Now, prior to this, the evening before, India had witnessed a little altercation with Charlie and Mrs. McCarrick, who she is the head maid or something like that. So she's over the maids for the house. Now they have a huge house. And so Mrs. McCarrick was alluding to the fact that she has been keeping him notified every step of the way, every year. And so they're having a tense exchange. So I don't know where the relationship between them is breaking down, but we know that she has been there since he was a little boy. And so she was like, you've been doing this to me since you're a little boy. And so all of a sudden now, after this exchange, there's no more Mrs. McGarrick. And so it doesn't seem like India had made a connection with that. And the mom, she just seems to have been out of it. She was just not really concerned. I don't think she even called Mrs. McGarrick to see like, hey, where are you? You're not here. So after they went to town and they came back and no Mrs. McGarrick, she said, well, Mrs. McGarrick is not here and I don't cook. And what do you know? Mr. Creepy Guy cooks. So he brought home ice cream, which, he didn't bring home the flavor that she liked. But anyway, they asked for her to bring the ice cream to the basement, put in the freezer, which is kind of weird because they have a massive house. Why isn't there a freezer on the main level? Why does she have to go into the basement, unfinished, dank, creepy-looking basement to put ice cream in the freezer? I feel like there was something down there that he wanted her to find while he was sending her down there. But that didn't happen that day. She hurried up and put the ice cream in there and ran back upstairs pretty much. So he decides, he want to cook. And so they had dinner. I guess he has cooking skills because India cleaned her plate. And it seemed that Evie enjoyed the meal as well. So while they were at the table, he was having some conversation and bringing up Richard and her mom. Evie didn't want to talk about that. So she decided that she was going to leave the table, which she did. So it was just Charlie and India at the table. So he had a glass of wine, and he mentions that the wine is from 1994, which is the year she was born, which was like, okay, what's the relevance of this? Why are you telling her this? This is just creepy. Because he hadn't been around. She doesn't know him, so how does he know when she was born? And why is this relevant? Why is he, having a wine from the year that she was born? What is he celebrating? What is he not saying? So she's only in high school. So another thing is, why are you giving her wine? So anyway, she took the glass and she took a sip and she asked, "What do you want from me?" And he says he wants to be friends. I'm like, what? What is he? Looks like he's at least in his 30s. Why would you want to be friends with a high schooler? But anyway, she says, we don't have to be friends. We're family. So that's I guess the end of the conversation. So next we see where she's at school. It's the end of the day. She's coming out, and there he is, parked up in the front of the school in his sports car, looking like a model with his sunglasses on. And of course, teenage girls, everybody's like whispering and like oohs and ahs. And she just ignored him and went on the bus and took the bus home as usual. So another day that she came home, we see her mom teaching him piano. They were really cozy on the little piano bench, and just seemed like an appropriate level of closeness to me. And so she's flirty with him, and so we get the impression that, something's going to happen between these two. Later we see where her Auntie Jen, came to visit, and it doesn't seem like Charlie really wanted her to be there. And it doesn't seem like her mom, Evie, wanted her to be there either, because she was asking, "Oh, when did you arrive? When will you be leaving?" That was brought up in the conversation. And we get the impression that Evie and Auntie Jen didn't really have a good relationship. So now that she's here and she has a concern about Charlie, she's not open to listening. So Evie had mentioned that, oh, it's nice for Charlie to come from Europe, blah, blah, blah. And Auntie Evie was like, Europe? And so she's looking at him, and then he leaves the table to go make tea. And so while he's away, she's like, oh, we need to talk about, what's been going on. And so, Evie is saying, well, my attorneys will take care of it. You're not in the will, so you don't need to worry about it. And she's like, no, not that, but other things. And so I think she was trying to hint that they need to talk privately, but she wasn't having it. And then she was also like, after she rebuffed her about that and saying, oh, you in my house and blah, blah, blah. She was like, okay, well, maybe we can have breakfast as, us girls had breakfast. And she's like, no, thank you. So, yeah, she tried to warn her about this guy, and she didn't get around to doing it at the dinner. So anyway, we see where she's leaving in the cab, and Charlie walks her out and asks where she's staying. And she says, she's staying at the Biltmore. And of course, she didn't really want to tell him, but when she got back in the car, she asked the taxi driver if there's any other hotels around, because she didn't want to stay where she told him that she was staying, because she was scared of him. So she ended up going to a motel. It wasn't really the best accommodations, but she wasn't at the other hotel. So she went out to the payphone, and she's calling and calling. I think she was trying to reach Evie to try to tell her something, but there was no answer. The reason she was at the payphone was because she didn't have her cell phone. I think her cell phone may have been at the other hotel, but she didn't go back there. So then while she was in the booth, guess who shows up? Mr. Creepy shows up now. And she was like, oh my gosh. She's like, she knew something was going to happen. And what do you know? He's like, I went to the hotel and you weren't there. Thank goodness I was able to talk to the taxi company. So he tracked her down to where she was, and he had her cell phone. And of course, poor Auntie Jen, it didn't end so well for her. So then after that happened, I guess nobody was really concerned about Auntie Jen not showing up or hearing from her. At one point later on in the movie, when India had discovered the letter, she had tried to reach her, but there was no answer. And of course, her mom wasn't concerned because they didn't really have a good relationship. So we see in the movie that India seemed to be having a little bit of an inappropriate obsession or feelings towards Charlie, because we see where she was playing the piano and then it kind of morphs into like a daydream where they were having a duet together. And so there was some sexual energy there in that. And I was like, Jesus, what is going on? This is getting twisted. So the guy keeps coming to school again. And so she acts as if he's not there. And she's walking down. She had an altercation with a group of guys who were saying mean stuff to her and talking about her mom and her uncle. How they knew that, I don't know. But anyway, she ended up stabbing one of them with a pencil. I was like, I don't condone violence, but I was like, okay, do what you have to do. All right, so one night, we see where she discovers her uncle and her mom. I mean, we could see this coming because she was just so flirty, and I don't know. I just don't know what she was thinking. And so she saw them in the dining room, and they didn't know that she was there. And then after she saw that, she ran off. So she ended up going to a diner, and she saw one of the guys, a guy that she knew. This guy was around the time that she had that altercation with the group of boys, and he seemed cool. He's like, don't worry about them. They're a-holes. Don't worry about them. So he seemed kind of cool. So they didn't go into the diner, but they ended up going to a secluded park, and they were talking or whatever. They started making out. And then when she wanted to stop, he didn't want to, and so she kicked him or something or punched him or something like that. And then he ended up getting her back. And I was like, oh, no. What do you know now? Mr. Creepy shows up. Thankful this time. And so he bounded the guy, and he was like, he's all yours. So she was like kicking him and, getting her revenge. And I was like, okay, I thought that was the end of it. And so then we see where India's in the shower. She's all dirty from being at the park. And so she's in the shower and she's remembering the events of the park. And we see where she is recalling how he pretty much took his belt off and kind of used the belt as a weapon and pretty much decapitated the guy. And so he took the body to some area, and we see where she was using the hole, or what do you call that? She was digging the hole, basically. She was helping to bury the body. The weirdest thing that happened was that she was pleasuring herself in the shower, recalling these events, which was like, what? I did not see this coming. What in the world is going on? So then after she came downstairs, she was brushing her mom's hair, and she mentioned what she saw in the dining room. She also noticed that her mom didn't have her wedding ring on, so she was like, So her mom was like, oh, you didn't see what you think you saw. It's like, I hate when people say that. So anyway, her mom mentioned that she was going to be doing her hair tomorrow after she cleans out her dad's study. So we see the next day that she goes into the study, and she has this key that she's been wearing on this keychain, on this necklace. And it was a key that she got for her birthday, but she didn't really know what it belonged to. Maybe she didn't. I don't know. Somehow now she uses this key to open the drawer in the office. And so she finds there's a gun in there. She found some childhood photos that belong to her dad. And then also she found this pile of letters that, looking at the letters, they were addressed to her. And it looks like the letters, she began to read them, and they were coming from her Uncle Charlie. And the letters were alluding to him being, traveling all over the world, writing from different locations, telling her about what he's doing, what's there, about the customs and stuff like that. So then when she was going up the stairs with a bunch of letters in her hand, one fell out, and we see that the backside is up, and there's a stamp on it for the Crawford Institute, which she was like, what in the world? Because in these letters, he's telling her he's in these different locations, Florence, Africa, you name it. And it was stamped for the Crawford Institute, which is in Pennsylvania. So she realized that it was all a lie. He wasn't really in these places that he said he was. And so she was going to call the police, but then she called the sheriff's department. But then he was like, when she was on the phone, he came up to the window and was just peering at her. So when they picked up, she didn't report it. Anyway, we see where he gave her this this box, which was supposed to be a birthday present, and he took off her shoes. In the box was a pair of heels, so he took off her shoes and put it on her, and he was saying happy birthday to her, and you could tell that something inappropriate was about to happen. But then the doorbell rang, and so it was the sheriff asking about the boy that she had met up with that night. So she was explaining, trying to not say she was with him, that he left and all that. And so she was getting tangled up in the lies that she was trying to tell. And of course, he was, lurking. So he came out to offer up her alibi and help her strengthen up her story. And so they were able to get the sheriff to leave. So before the sheriff left, he was asking about the housekeeper. She heard from the housekeeper because she left to go out of town so suddenly, and she said no. So he thought it was strange that she just left. But anyway, he kept going. So Charlie thinks that the sheriff's going to come back, and he offers up New York. Because initially, he was supposed to be going to New York because his brother, Richard, did not want him at his house. And so she asked when, and so he said tomorrow night. So while they were there on the stairs, we see where, again, and something inappropriate was about to happen, but then we see where her mom comes out on the landing, and she noticed what was happening, and she looked really scared and nervous at the same time, and she seemed like she was embarrassed because, remember, she had made out with him. And so she said sorry and quickly retreated. And later, we see where the mom is sitting down, and she's having this conversation, like kind of alluding to the fact that maybe people have kids because they want to, try to have a second chance at stuff that they messed up and stuff that they wanted to accomplish that they themselves didn't get to accomplish. So it seemed like she was maybe regretting in that moment having her. And she asked her who she is and says, oh, you were supposed to love me. So it seems as though she was feeling betrayed by her daughter. But why? You shouldn't be involved with him anyway, neither of you. But it seems like she was feeling, I guess, embarrassed or upset about this whole thing that Charlie was taking a liking to her daughter. So then Evie goes upstairs and she asks Charlie to come up with her. And then he went upstairs and we see where she closes the door. He says, I only came to say goodbye. And she says, I can't allow you to do this. So it seems as though she's finally got her eyes open and she's finally putting two and two together about what happened with Richard and Jen. And so she offers herself up and asks him to stay away from her daughter. And he was like, no, thank you. He says she's of age. So she began to get emotional. She's crying. There's tears streaking her face. And then he starts to kiss her and try to make out with her. And so she starts to go along with it, and I think as a distraction. And so anyway, while this is happening now, he took off his belt and he had his belt around her neck. And so he's calling for India. He's calling her to come watch. And so he thought she would be happy about this, or I don't know, they're supposed to be partners in crime. And so he didn't expect for her to come up armed, but she was. And so she was able to save her mom. So the movie ends with the following day. I'm guessing you see a trail of blood that's along the floor, like you could tell that a body was being dragged along it. But it doesn't seem like the mom had anything to do with it because she was in bed and she seemed like she was really hungover. Then we see India at the garage, and she's getting into the sports car. But we see where there's something looking like pruning shears on the seat, and she dropped a bag on top of it. So it seemed like she was planning to leave town or something. And so she's speeding along down the road, and what do you know? She gets pulled over by the sheriff, and it's the same sheriff that came to the house. And he was like, do you know why I pull you over? And so... he mentioned that she was speeding, and she was like, she was speeding, she said something in French, which was weird because her uncle was speaking French. So what is happening here? Why is she now speaking French? Did the crazy just transfer from him to her? That's what was running in my head. But anyway, so it seemed like it was a trap that she was setting for him so that he would pull her over, because when he pulled her over, it didn't end well for him. Let's just say that. And so this is how the movie ended. This was one real twisted one, but I enjoyed it. There was a little bit of gore in it, which I feel like wasn't really necessary because they could infer what was happening without showing gore, but it wasn't too much. It was really twisted and creepy, but I really wanted to know, like, you know, after I found out that he really wasn't an imposter, what was this guy here about? What was his angle and what was happening between her and him, meaning India and Charlie, because they were related. This is just weird and creepy. But it was a good movie. I would recommend it definitely. If you have seen this one, let me know your thoughts.